Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Beyond Max Q. I'm your host, Mollie Jahner. I am joined today with Ryan, who is, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. We have this person who knows all things about cybersecurity and law. We very rarely have lawyers or anybody associated with legal on our show. And so I'm going to go a little bit in depth on some of these topics because I think people are going to be interested in it. And the company is Constangy. And so with that, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to introduce myself. So my name is Ryan Steidl. I am a partner with our law firm Constangy. I'm based out of Seattle. I work within our cybersecurity and data privacy practice. Specifically, I lead our compliance advisory services, and within cyber, we like to segment ourselves roughly into three types of groups. We have our compliance services, we have our incident response services, and then we have our litigation services. But the firm is much broader than that. As a national firm, they cover a lot of other practice areas, including employment as another major area of focus. And yeah, my background it has spanned many different roles and experiences. And I'm happy to kind of bring those not just to Constangy, but also to today's conversation.
Yes, well, and I'm excited because you're focused on almost even this more specific group, like an innovation and technology group
Yes.
within the company, correct? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Constangy Cyber obviously has to deal with everything cyber, which means keeping up with the fast pace of emerging technology. But with our team doing quite a bit of work in incident response, we also are trying to keep up with the emerging threat landscape. And then, of course, whenever there is an event or an incident that happens, usually there's a class action suit that follows thereafter. And so even our
Mhm.
litigation team has to be pretty nimble and agile to the shifting environment, both in terms of threats and also these new and novel types of legal thoughts and actions that are out there. So even our litigation team, they're dealing with some pretty interesting issues because they then have to translate and understand how to defend against some of those emerging
Mhm.
compliance regulations and emerging threats and the after effects that come from that, as well as some of the ways that various plaintiffs and plaintiffs bar out there
Mhm.
are trying to adapt some of these regulations, even very, very old ones, to a brand new world of technology. And so across all of cyber, everyone is dealing with issues pretty much of first impression, which I think is what draws us all to this really niche area of law. For myself, and specifically the compliance advisory side of things
Mhm.
is, um, we're working with a number of issues that span a couple of different considerations. So a lot of us got our start in data privacy,
Mm.
which after the European Union's GDPR in
Right.
2018 spurred this big wave of new regulations around the world, including in the US, which is ongoing.
Mhm.
And then in recent years, we've seen some of the concepts that were in those data privacy regulations, such as automated decision-making technology, take on
Mhm.
a brand new life of their own, with everyone now talking about AI. And so you start bringing in those considerations on top of it. And
Mhm.
that's a lot of the proactive compliance. But then you also have to consider all of the cybersecurity regulations that have been around for quite some time, and then
Yes.
integrating that into a program. It's a fascinating area to be in because
Mhm.
you're dealing with new changes to laws that are creating these external pressures. You've got these external pressures coming from new threats and new security requirements, but then you also have these internal pressures because a lot of organizations can't tackle all of these things at once. And so
Right.
you need to work with them to figure out this risk-based approach to how can we do the most, as I think that my favorite quote is one by Teddy Roosevelt: "Do what you can where you are with what you've got." And
I
so
like that
a
one
lot of
too.
times we often have to start from there. Okay, what do you have? What can we do where you are right now? So,
Yes. That's great.
It's really fun because you almost get to be this hybrid role between
Mhm.
a traditional attorney, but then also being part of the business and the business group. I
Yes.
once had it described to me, and I've never ever forgot it, that you kind of have to treat the business as a customer.
Mhm.
And one person put it in particular that, the business and the people you work with are customer zero. And those are the people you have to start working with. And
Yes.
then you build that trust from there.
I love that. Well, and you hit on AI a little bit, which I was going to ask about. It's always the monster in the room, and I use that word on purpose, not elephant. Like it's the monster in the room that everyone's like, "Do we talk about it?" But I think it would be more beneficial to talk about when, and where do people engage with your firm? Like best case scenario, obviously before something bad happens. But can you talk a little bit about what that use case looks like?
Well, you bring up the exact point of ideally we want people to engage with Constangy Cyber and the proactive services first.
Okay.
We would love to address issues before they become issues, and we try and do that as much as we can. But uh, quite frankly, a large number of folks are coming to us
Hmm.
because they have experienced some sort of event or incident that has required our extremely competent and
Hmm.
talented breach attorneys to help them through these issues, as well as our litigation attorneys to kind of help with all of the aftershocks and after effects. And so we get involved after the fact as well. And if we say beforehand, we want to prevent issues before they become issues. Well, on the flip side, we want to make sure that if something happened once, it doesn't happen again. And so we will work with organizations on both sides of the equation.
Hmm.
But it's not a surprise really that a lot of these organizations are coming to us
Hmm.
because they have personally experienced an event or incident, or through their cyber insurance, they've
Oh,
been,
I didn't even realize cyber
informed.
insurance was a thing.
Oh yeah,
I mean, I know, like, there's insurance everywhere, but I'm like, I didn't realize cyber insurance. Like, is that for business? Is that for, like, individuals? Like, I feel like I might need that just for, like, my own password protection.
well, I can tell you that it is a complex marketplace, but it's complex because it is trying to provide that coverage to so
Okay.
many organizations, small, medium businesses, to the
I mean, it
super
makes sense.
largers and everything. And so, as far as with them coming to us, they start thinking about, oh, I need to be insured because I'm seeing all of these statistics about data breaches ticking up and the penalties and the fines, they're also going up.
Mhm.
IC3 releases annual statistics. And the most recent ones that I saw is that technically the number of recorded complaints and incidents went down only slightly. It went down from something I want to say 880,000 to 840,000.
Like, people
But
like, saying, "Hey, something bad happened to me, and there was a breach." Like, when you say that?
exactly, yeah. Or,
Okay.
or that there was a compromise or something happened with my data and they reported it to the IC3 commission. But on the flip side of that is that the monetary amounts associated
Cool.
actually went up by a third. So it went
Uh-oh.
from I want to say uh, I would have to go back, but it was a massive jump. I
Mhm.
can't remember if that was uh,
And when you're talking about this, are you talking about the people who call me and they're, like, the scammers that have, like, the facilities over in India? Who's doing the breaching?
oh boy. This is what that keeps us employed, and this is where it's really hard to give a definitive answer to people when they say, "What can I do?" Because they think that you're going to have like the magic answer to
Right.
solve all of their problems. And you bring up a good point. You do have your traditional scammers, and in a lot of ways, social engineering still remains one of the most prevalent and common threats out there. People
Can you
calling
explain that a
out.
little bit? What is social engineering? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. So social engineering is essentially where we'll call them a threat actor because it's
Okay.
just kind of the term and terminology and lingo. But it's where a threat actor will essentially take advantage of
Mm.
human flaws and weaknesses.
Okay.
Things like trust or In some cases, it may be things like fear. So
Mhm.
it might be a situation where somebody is calling up or sending an email saying, "Hey, I'm big name executive. My flight has been canceled and they're not accepting my credit card. Can you send me information from our travel account to this
Mhm.
address so I can book a ticket?" And
Or
with
an Apple, card. I feel like those are the big ones, like, "Hey, can you send me a gift card to iTunes?" And I'm like, "Are we still is iTunes still a thing?"
Well, I mean, I associate that almost more with like, well, trying to educate, parents and grandparents on,
Yes.
don't somebody's sending you a text saying, "Hey, your bank account has been hacked. You need to call us." That be on the lookout for that, or call me and we'll talk. But in a corporate context, the social engineering would look kind of like the situation that I've described.
Mhm.
Now, where it gets interesting goes back to what you were talking about, which involves AI, is that a
Yes.
lot of these threat actors are actually using AI in some, I have to say begrudgingly, some very interesting and novel ways. So some of the ways that
Begrudgingly.
they're
I was gonna ask you, like, what's the worst things you've seen, but we're gonna save that for a little bit later. Please keep going.
So some of the ways they're actually using it and seeing more and more of it, and this is something that you had to sort of advise organizations to add to their list of things to be aware of, is they will crawl social media for talks and events and videos of these various executives and people in leadership, and they will use that information and the AI tools that are out there to either clone their voice, or in some pretty larger situations, even clone their image and their likeness. And so it gets a lot harder to spot those types of wire fraud scams
Mhm.
if the person on the other end of the line sounds exactly like your boss. You're not going to say, "Hey, is this really CFO calling to transfer funds?" You're the
Mhm.
voice that you talk to every single day. You're probably going to act without even thinking about it. And then
Yeah.
maybe something sets off your radar screen after the fact. Or in the more sophisticated cases, they're getting on a video call. And
That's crazy. This part's crazy
yes,
to me. Video ca like, it really freaks me out. It's so dystopian, like, that you can just totally clone somebody and you look like you, and it's like, "What is happening?"
oh, it's incredible to see what can be done. And they can write off certain things, like, "Hey," or it's like, "We don't look quite like you do." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in a public place and I've got a really bad background behind me
Yes.
that's glitching in and out.
Oh my god.
Common excuse, yeah, or easy to believe to write
Your
off.
voice
And
sounds
so,
the same, and you're like, "Oh, okay, that's Bill." No, it's
yeah,
not.
exactly. Exactly, it looks like them. It sounds like them.
Yeah.
the hard part with all of that is like it's almost like you have to start having this inherent distrust of your own senses,
Yes.
and then
That's a
that's what
great
they
way to
take
put it.
advantage of. That's what they take advantage of in a social engineering context. Um, and that is by far, I think, still a very common way that some of these threats come about.
Mhm.
But on the other side of that, and we can also talk about the use of AI too, is that we have organizations out there which are, for all intents and purposes, complete criminal enterprises. They have a hierarchy, they have a leadership, they have training, they are organized, funded. Um, they are they are a business
Yeah.
in all senses of the word, and because of that, they have these massive resources that they draw on, and they are sometimes state sponsored or semi-state sponsored. Um, and they will do some things that are they take their time. They're patient.
Mm.
They'll do their
That's
research.
creepy. I
Yeah,
don't want that.
it's extremely creepy. There was a recent event or a recent compromise that happened, um, and I won't name names at the moment, but I think most people out there are probably pretty familiar with the company and could probably infer from context. But essentially, what they found out is that this what they presume was a state-sponsored group had gotten into the company's networks,
Mm-hmm.
and from there had actually been able to silently traverse the network and then actually get into the source code that is embedded in all of these server systems and all of these databases. And it was several years that they were in the network. And essentially, when it came out, it was huge for a lot of organizations because essentially it meant that all of the hardware that you rely on may
Mm-hmm.
have been compromised and may have been open to this group for a very long time.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so,
Is that where you
uh,
come in and you're like, hey, we can fix it?
we want to try and fix that in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. But I think for a lot of organizations, it is that they often have to start small and kind of
Mhm.
build up momentum.
Okay.
But for larger organizations, those who have been doing a lot of data privacy work for a long, long time,
Yep.
or they have these robust cybersecurity programs that have been in place and they've been doing annual cybersecurity assessments against the NIST cybersecurity framework or ISO for years and years and years. They can build off of that. But the small and medium businesses are actually one of the larger targets for a
For
lot of these
sure.
groups because they know that they don't have as many resources. They don't have the same number of IT personnel.
Mhm.
Those IT personnel are stretched thin. They don't have the budgets, and there's just a lot of weaknesses in those areas. And you kind of have to balance. Do we go for the big payday, or do we go for the guaranteed, little amount
Mhm.
that we can bring in over and over and over again? And so I think a lot of organizations on the smaller side might say, oh, we're not one of those big S&P 500 companies. There's no possible way that we could be a threat. We're so small, they're going to completely look past us. And that's not the case. Earlier this year, there was a major industry event involving this one I'll name out loud, involving Power School.
Mm.
And Power School is this provider of various services for schools and school districts to help manage, student accounts and
Mhm.
information. And they compromise millions and millions of accounts and information in schools pretty much up and down the West Coast. I
Mhm.
believe it had some nationwide impacts as well, but you, it's a great example of how you wouldn't think that a school district would be a target of these groups, and yet they were actually an extremely uh, attractive and probably a pretty lucrative target because
Mhm.
they have a vested interest in getting themselves back online, regaining trust, and with a number of school districts and parents and children and associated regulations that come with protecting children's information at that
Mhm.
higher standard, not to mention all the other things that come with
Mhm.
this panoply of compliance considerations. It's really motivating to play ball with
Mhm.
these threat actors, and they know it.
Oh man. Well, and I want to ask too because our audience is mostly startups, right? It's founders, it's people who are maybe not quite medium sized, but definitely small, businesses that are just getting started, and oftentimes there's a lot of IP. And,
Yes.
and that's always important to talk through. And also a lot of proprietary data because they're working through different compliances. So oftentimes it's manufacturers or people who need to be FedRAMP compliant or things like that. So, what does a startup, from your perspective, what are the top three things a startup needs to consider as they start to build from a cybersecurity and law perspective?
Yeah, it's another great question. So if you're just starting out, and I'm going to assume you have nothing in place that you could passably call a cybersecurity or privacy or a data governance program. And
Hmm.
so no matter what, across all of these, I usually point to three big things that
Hmm.
can go a very long way towards addressing most problems right off the bat. And the first is, and it sounds kind of silly, but coming from an attorney, but it's a policy and a procedure. You just have to put in writing, these are the ground rules and the guardrails that
Mhm.
our organization is going to abide by, and we expect everyone else to abide by. You put it in
You have
writing,
to make it
and then
official, like, do you have to have a notary sign it? Like, how does it become official?
I'll get to that on point
Okay,
number two.
okay, I was like, like, I'm asking for, like, a friend, like, writing.
Yes. So you establish those guardrails and ground rules and guidelines, and that policy can start with regulatory compliance or various other compliance and legal obligations. It's a great starting point, but it's also an opportunity for you to define what is our business's tolerance for risk. How risk accepting or risk averse are
Mhm,
we going to be? And you can incorporate those standards in there. Some organizations, they want to be extremely innovative and they will
mhm,
do bare minimum compliance so they can be running as fast as possible. Others, because they know they're trying to develop a product that may involve sensitive information or sensitive topics, they might want to have a little bit more. And then, of course, there's the hybrid situations as well.
mhm,
So you kind of want to get that understanding of both. You could call it inherent and residual risk in a
okay,
lot of ways.
okay,
Our inherent risk is the compliance requirements, and then the residual risk is that business tolerance. Like what do
gotcha,
we want to address after the fact that would influence, say, our reputation in the
mhm,
marketplace or our
mhm,
competitiveness against those that we're going up against if we're trying to really be innovators and leaders
mhm,
in this space. So that achieves a number of objectives, and it's a great starting point. But as with anything, a policy is just a piece of paper. It's a very
mhm,
nice piece of paper, but oftentimes you really can't do a lot with it. And so this is where having uh, at least one individual
mhm,
accountable for enforcing it is good. But with the rise of artificial intelligence and AI, uh, I very much advocate that oversight of these types of programs, whether they be governance, compliance, and data management, it needs to be by committee now. Because somebody could take the same question to legal or to
mhm,
IT or to marketing or
right,
innovation or procurement, same question. And they would probably get different answers from every single person.
mhm,
So by having a committee, it's an opportunity to establish consistency across
mhm,
the organization. And they can be at toll gate, not to prevent innovation, but to make sure unnecessary risk is not being introduced and that these policies are being followed and that they can also be working with each other if they get a use case and they can coordinate a lot quicker and more efficiently by
mhm,
talking about all of the issues at once in terms of, well, this is what our tech stack is going to need to
mhm,
either accomplish or change in order to do this. And then this is how it affects our regulatory exposure. But if
mhm,
we go about it this way, then we may need to hire somebody else or bring on a third party vendor to help support the process. And you can see how quickly you have to get all those voices
escalate,
in the room in the
yeah,
first place. So if you already have it designed by default, then, and that goes back to like privacy and security by default and by design by
mhm,
default. If it's already there, it just makes it that much easier.
mhm,
And you can make sure that everyone has an opportunity to go through that process and they can make sure the policy is being followed. It's being regularly reviewed and adapted and updated,
mhm,
and just making sure that it's remaining flexible for both whatever requirements, those external, and then those business objectives. What do we want to be? What do we want to do?
ultimate,
Now, the third part behind all of that is to make sure that it is guided by some form of assessment process. Usually it would be a risk assessment process
Hmm.
to be able to identify, are there concerns? Are there gaps? Are there risks at
Hmm.
various points in the process? And using AI as the example is you want to be assessing risk at many, many points, not just once. You want to be assessing risk in the due diligence part of it. If
Hmm.
you're bringing this in from an external source or a provider out there, you want to do that, have some form of assessment process beforehand. If you're developing it internally, you want to make
Hmm.
sure that you're going through looking at your controls, that everything is safe and that it's going to operate the way you want to, so
Hmm.
that you're not down the line going to get in trouble for things like, oh, we used an improper data set that we weren't supposed to, or we had bias in our uh, inputs or outputs
Hmm.
that are going to create liability for us. Often comes up in an employment context.
Hmm.
Or we weren't able to identify model drift, and therefore some of the decisions that we've made have
What is model
impacted it.
drift? When you say
So
that, I
model
think of like Tokyo drifting, Fast and Furious, which I know is absolutely not what you're talking about. So what is model drift?
Yeah, so model drift is when you get this sometimes slow, sometimes fast, but the model itself that you're using drifts away from its its intended purpose or
Okay.
functionality.
I
And
mean,
so,
what it sounds like. All right, that makes sense. I just was like,
like,
"Wow, it sounds really interesting," and then I went, "Oh, Paul Walker?" And I was like, "No, no, no, that's not right."
yeah, I think especially in this type of space, folks are getting a little bit better about naming things that they actually are, as opposed to
Yeah,
using obscure terminology that you
that's
then have
helpful.
to consult the ancient texts on in order to interpret.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
so,
It's perfect.
um, and so before you put anything in place, as you're putting it in place, and then regularly testing it and making sure that it continues to function the way you want to, and that it continues to be fit for purpose as things change. So new data to train the model or new use cases and things of that nature. And so you want to have that ongoing
Mhm.
assessment of how things are functioning, and then to
Yep.
be able to document that and show, no, we have oversight of all of this. We have a policy that's in place. We have a group that's accountable for it. And here's the documentation to show that
Mm,
we are putting what we say and what we do into practice, and we can prove it with hard results, so that
mhm,
if anything did happen adverse, you have an opportunity for more defensibility
mhm,
in sort of class action or lawsuit or investigation. But I think, especially for innovators and startups, you have more data to conduct a postmortem. Where did
mhm,
things go wrong? Let's figure it out where that happened, and how can we improve it without having to expend unnecessary resources doing this deep dive. If you have all that
mhm,
information available, you can more quickly start to identify, oh, this is where we started going off track. Let's
mhm.
correct.
Yep. No, I love all of that. This has been a really good conversation. We do keep these podcasts fairly short. I think we probably could talk all day about this topic because it's a big one. But we always end with, "What are you currently reading?" As a
Well, I think
lawyer, I would be interested to hear what it is. Is it something light and fun, or are you deep in the ancient texts, like you said?
I am reading a number of things these days
Okay.
across a variety of sources. So I think obviously I have to keep up
What's
with a
your
lot of
favorite?
my favorite is, well, when I'm logged off, I am usually reading uh, some biography of someone way, way back. And it's interesting to see how history kind of echoes through
Mhm,
times. You read about all these events and you kind of see, oh, we're looking at something that seems very, very similar, and thinking about, how could we how might that impact us right now? So, for
mhm,
instance, I know some people are not the biggest fan of Ron Chernow as a biographer, but I think he's a great writer. I like the topics he writes on.
mhm,
Um, and reading a history of Rockefeller and I'm early into the book, but it's talking about his early days where he kind of got this start.
Hmm.
He was extremely innovative in the services that he was providing in the financial world, quickly rose through the ranks, and then started identifying oil as this resource that had huge
Hmm.
potential to kind of revolutionize how things are done. And as a result, started taking some of these actions that become well known for
Right.
and in many instances is vilified for, but things like I don't want to just purchase oil, the product is I want to purchase the rail lines and I want to
Yeah.
purchase the ships and the shipping
Hmm.
and I want to have negotiating power over how this is transported across the lakes,
Right.
locks, and channels. And then I want to have control over the pipelines and I want to have control over the source. And
How to create a monopoly is the title of the book. Is what is the name?
not quite, but I think it just kind of goes to show, that it's, the darker side of that, but you
Yes.
can see how that is almost, industrial revolution or
Yes.
a physical analog of
Okay.
what you kind of see in digital spaces these days is people are looking, data is the oil. So
Mhm.
how do we control the pipelines? How do we control the
Interesting.
dissemination? How do we control how people use this and purchase it and get use out of it? And so it's not just looking at the basic resource itself, but it's looking at the entire ecosystem out
Hmm.
there. And because of that, you then have to start thinking about all the various considerations that come
Okay.
into play. So I know it was a little bit different back then, but using the same example,
Yeah.
you'd be talking about interstate commerce laws. You'd be
Hmm.
talking about
Yep.
employment, uh, monitoring and things like of that nature. You'd be talking about negotiating contracts with vendors and making
Hmm.
sure that you have the strongest terms and you're protecting yourself from liability. And then you're making sure that you're working within the bounds of acceptable trade practices that are not going to draw scrutiny and investigations. And so
Hmm.
you look at something like that from 100 plus years ago and you
Yeah.
start thinking about it and going, you know what, in a lot of ways this feels strangely familiar.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to end. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I'll put links in the description so everyone can go find Ryan and join on LinkedIn and go follow Constangy and find out what they're doing and how they might be able to help you. Thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Molly.